walk in the spirit is difficult, dealing with all of the ignorance. But in the Bible, it's still talking about the Bible. What is the benefit? Everything about you counterfeit. There ain't no rebuttal you can counter with. On the internet, you the master teacher. In real life, you powerless. Keep it real with you, I don't have time for this. I ride for this, my forefathers died for this. They cry for this opportunity presently I possess, and right now you are the opposite. If you walk in love, you fulfill the law. Don't get involved and you ain't giving it all. If you ever think it's cool to threaten another man's family, then you already lost. Chemtrails got aluminum, heavy metal saturate the atmosphere. Manhattan Project, time travel, Mandela effect, what happened here? GMO food processing to the whole world become obsolete. A black man who believes in Jesus got my own team taking shots at me. You trespassing on property that you don't fully understand properly. All the back and forth, that's not for me, that's for ROC and the War Machine. If we ride together, then we ride together. If we can't do it, I'd rather leave. I still stand on the word of God till the day I die and no longer breathe. We trapped inside the diaspora, nightmares of the massacre. Cold sweat, I'm below deck in the middle passage, just a passenger. Revolutionary hardcore, liberation, that's a hard job. You ain't ready, you a oddball. Keep your mouth closed like lockjaw. I learned trying to bring people together on the same page, make them separate. All the talk about reconciliation, when the time come, you hesitate. If Jesus was able to sit at the table with a bunch of sinners, you very fake. Your steps ordered by the Lord, and how it was yesterday, your big mistake. We the city sitting on the hill. Guess it all depends on how you live. Guess it all depends on how you feel, and we both know that ain't God's will. I stood on what I felt was right. I don't never question if God's real. Trapped inside this matrix, I'm about to pop the red and the blue pill.
Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:14-21.
Peace, peace, peace. What it is, it's your brother Tyvon Swinnell, aka the Orthodox Moore, aka the Seven Pillar Saracen, aka Brother Moore, wishing you all peace and blessings. Real quick, family, I wanted to bring y'all kind of like a book club kind of a thing. I wanted to introduce y'all to some books that I thought were very, very important and integral for the community to understand. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're an Israelite, whether you're a Moor, whether you're a Pan-Africanist, etc. There is definitely a book that I want to talk to y'all about in terms of understanding African history in America and the traditions that come along with us coming off the slave ship and whatnot. And I really want to slow this one down and gear this one towards the people who practice either like a Christian perspective or like a Messianic Israelite perspective. Because you're going to be told a lot by like Afrocentrists and people in the conscious community, etc., that you can't see your tradition coming off the slave ships and that the white man, so-called white man, taught you your tradition, etc. And for a long time, you know, I used to hold the same concepts myself in terms of being given the Bible, being taught the Bible, or being taught about Jesus, etc., whatnot. I had the same concepts myself. It wasn't until I learned more about Islam in West Africa that I learned, oh wow, there were people who believed in Jesus before they got on slave ships, etc. It wasn't until that's how I recognized I was looking at this thing all wrong. And so I decided to take a different look at things and whatnot. And I'm glad I bought a couple of books. In the past year and change or whatnot, you've seen me deal with the pew concept in Savannah, Georgia, etc. And in that that search for knowledge and in that discussion and whatnot, I've purchased a lot of books having to do with low country history in terms of like like from Maryland to Florida, etc. Georgia in particular, Gullah Geechee culture and history, language, etc. And it's really helped me to understand my own history, like my own father's people come from Alabama, also by way of Georgia and by way of Maryland. And they had a strong Geechee culture to them. And there was a lot of things that my father told me growing up that I found echoed in this book that I'm about to show y'all. And so real quick, let me share my screen, because this is a fantastic book, family. I personally feel that this book should be mandatory reading in public schools during Black History Month. I feel that strongly about it. Because this book here is like talking to your great grandparents, right? Like, so this book, Drums and Shadows, Survival Studies Among the Georgia Coastal Negroes, written by the Georgia Writers Project. It documents multiple accounts from people in the 1930s that are speaking about their traditions going back from times going back, etc. whatnot, right? And we have people that are being talked to. Some are in their early 20s and 30s, etc. The majority of what people are looking for is the oldest people they can find to go talk to. That's what I found to be interesting about. They were specifically going to go find the old people to go talk to, right? So like, there's a lot of people in their 70s, 80s, etc. But there's a lot of people in their hundreds as well, talking about like 130, 120, 115, 101, etc. And we got these people from their 80s to their hundreds or whatnot, talking to you about their grandparents and their great grandparents or whatnot. So they're giving you understandings and breakdowns that go back a couple of hundred years, fam. And even a little bit further, right? So if we're talking about like a book written in the 1930s, you can literally, and just to give a perspective, like there's a lot of people in this book are born before the Civil War, okay? Born like decades before the Civil War. If you can imagine that concept. And there's a lot of talk about this book in terms of what life is like before the Civil War and after the Civil War, etc. But when you understand the time frame, the time span, and like the lifespan of these people, you're easily getting a view of life that can go back into the 1730s easily. And this book and a bunch of other books helped me to understand my father's culture better, having come from the South, etc. In particular, from he came up in a freshwater Geechee culture, but his people came from like a saltwater Geechee culture. And a freshwater Geechee culture mix, and they blended together in Alabama and whatnot. And even as a kid growing up, wanting to know about my history, at one point I figured out that, you know what I'm saying, like, yeah, my history goes beyond slavery, etc. So I'm picking up all kind of West African mythology books and all kind of stuff like that, trying to figure out what are the mythological stories of West Africa, whatnot, right? My father is actually named Remus. That is his actual birth name, Remus. So a lot of people are familiar with the tales of Uncle Remus or whatnot, where a European man had taken tales that he grew up hearing on the plantation or whatnot and put them in a book or whatnot. Like the stories of like Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, Brer Bear, etc. And a lot of people know those stories, but are not familiar with like the Disney movie, The Song of the South, etc., where all that stuff is depicted in movie form or whatnot. So I'm somewhat familiar with certain kind of stories and whatnot, mythologies and whatnot. But what I found interesting about this book is this book actually documents that kind of stuff, right? It documents those tales from the people themselves and whatnot, or documents them being mentioned, etc., right? There's talks of all kind of traditions in this book. And so this book is valuable for everybody, whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Pan-Africanist, someone who deals with African spirituality. Whether you just want to understand history, all them kind of things. Very valuable. They speak in the Gullah dialect, which I think is very interesting. Like, this book is a very interesting read in the sense, like, you feel like the more you read it, you feel like you're talking to your great grandparents. You really start to feel it. Because of like, for me at least, like because of the way they were speaking and whatnot, right? Like, so again, my grandfather, he spoke with the Gullah dialect and whatnot, right? Like, so when I read this, I'm like, I'm starting to hear him more and more in my ear, you know what I'm saying? So if you have people that have that kind of background, this particular book will definitely resonate with you. But something I want to focus on here, in this particular video, and I'm gonna break down how this applies to different traditions and whatnot, like whether if you're Muslim or Moorish, or if you're Christian or Messianic Israelite, or if you're Pan-Africanist and deal with African spirituality, etc. I'm gonna break down all that type of stuff because I think it's interesting to point out from all sides and whatnot. But I'm going to specifically focus on the Low Country Christianity that's in this book, because there's something that stood out to me. There is a set of practice. When I read this book, there's something that just really, really struck me hard and deep. There is a set of practices that is practiced amongst the Christians in the Low Country that, when seen by other African descent Christians who basically had like the European Christianity, they called it like just African religion, and said that these people didn't know, they didn't have a real Christianity. And I was like, wow. So I want to be clear about what I'm saying. I'm saying that there was one African American man who was saying that these other people who were practicing their form of Christianity, he didn't even recognize it as Christianity. He just called it some African religion. He said, "Oh, those Africans don't have no real religion anyway, like Christianity." I want to point that out. Like, so there's two types of Christianity pointed out in this. And I'm not talking about doctrinal kind of, like, I'm not talking about like Baptist or Methodist or Calvinist. I'm not saying, I'm talking about like there is this concept of like the Christianity of the slave master is thrown in our faces with people who practice the Bible, and they go into like so-called the conscious community or Pan-Africanist communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, what this is documenting is there's an African form of Christianity that the slaves practiced, and then there is another form of Christianity that doesn't even recognize the African form as Christianity. And that in and of itself, if you're a Christian or a Messianic Israelite, is worth picking this book up to understand, because when you understand that framing and lens of how things are understood, like, this is what I literally grew up with this concept with my father, right? He literally, like, he broke down the fact there's us, and then there's the people who deal with like the voodoo and whatnot. He's like, we're not the same people. My father broke that one down to me cold when I was a kid, right? And then he broke down some stuff that I'm going to tell you later that I thought was interesting, because there was a clear parallel set of practices that was going on amongst his people that would be considered similar to like the voodoo people from like someone from the ignorant eye, from someone who didn't know the culture and whatnot, right? Like the difference between like a root doctor and a witch doctor, right? Or a conjure doctor, right? For some people, they're the same thing. For some people, they're different. And that's the part that I want to emphasize in this book is how you can see them as the same and how you can see them as different. So what I did was I went and documented. This book you can get in a couple different forms, a cheaper form, a more expensive one. I bought the form on the left, which is a little bit of a cheaper form. It has, I'm about to give some page numbers to some stuff that I found in this book, and I'm going to further expound on in other videos. However, the page numbers correspond to the book on the left, not to the one on the right. So if you buy the book on the right, I apologize. Information is the same, page numbers are different. But going forward, one of the first things that stood out to me was this concept of a harvest feast or a crop supper or a first harvest feast, right? Where the first of the crops, the first of your harvest were taken down to the church. They were brought down to the church. People prayed over it. They divided it amongst the people so that everybody could have an equal share. And then the people would dance and sing in a circle, and what's called a ring shout. And they would also end up praying when it was all said and done. They'd also end up praying towards the east with their heads bowed to the ground, etc. And I found this to be an extremely, extremely interesting practice. as like I did a small video on one passage from this, and I'm going to do a part 2 to this whole part right here, just to really get down into the specific aspects of it. I'm not going to break down the specific aspects of each practice here. I'm going to give a broad understanding, and then I'm going to do a separate video to where I break down via the page number the practices you can understand and can glean from this. Because what's beautiful about this, family, is you get multiple people telling the same story from different parts of Georgia. You get multiple people telling the same story from different parts of Georgia, and they're all talking about the same details. So you get a fully detailed breakdown of these practices, family. So in my first video, I break down how this first harvest feast corresponds to the first fruits practice in the Old Testament, etc. And even down to the word that they use for festival or feast and whatnot, right? Hag or Hagag, or like in the Arabic, the term Hajj. Where it literally has this kind of this meaning of doing a sacred procession in a circle, and also this concept of dancing and celebration of a festival and a solemn feast. So ironically, when I made that video, a brother from the Congo got at me and was breaking down some languages that they speak over there, and showing me similarities between the words that they use. Hold on. I'm gonna get my dying computer right quick. Appreciate you. But yeah, he sent me some words that were that I have to double check in terms of definition of validity and whatnot. But like, it seems that there's actually the Bantu words that link up to like the Hebrew word for like the Hajj or the Hag or the Hagag, to where they're actually going in a circle doing what they're doing. We're going forward. So yeah, we got people take like this. This is what it looks like when people are taking the harvest down to the church, etc., whatnot. And like I said, they take it down to the church. They pray over it, and they divide it amongst the people so that everybody can have a piece of it. And then they do this circle dancing and shouting. And again, in the way they practice the tradition, they do it all night, basically, right? So they're doing it to exhaustion, etc., right? And even when you look up this word for Hajj or Hag or Hagag, etc., it's talking about like the circular procession, but also like reeling to and fro and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? So you really get the same connotations with this whole thing. This also matches up with Muslims doing Hajj, but I'm going to break that one down on a different video, because the practices. So I thought that I really thought that the practices I saw in terms of, I'm going to show you, for instance, this prayer practices where they pray, like I just said, where they pray facing the east, right, with bowing down to the ground. I literally thought that they got all that from the Muslims and whatnot. And then when I read this book, I noticed that there's two different practices of how people do it. The Muslims are doing it with prayer rugs, etc., saying certain things and reciting in certain ways. And the people who are calling themselves Christians, etc., they're doing it without prayer rugs. And they're doing it a slightly different way. But again, they're both facing the east, and they're both doing like the standing and bowing and prostrating concept, right? And it hit me. I was like, wow, that's very similar to the book of Daniel, where Daniel, he's and literally it's the same word in Hebrew and the same word in Arabic, right? In Arabic, they say make salat, right? In Hebrew, in the book of Daniel, you see this to where he's making salah towards Jerusalem 3 times a day. And you can see where King David talks about praying, calling out to the Lord morning, noon, and night, which was their practice. They prayed at the sunrise, they prayed at the midday of the sun, and they prayed at the sunset, which you can already see is different from the Islamic prayer, because they pray 5 times a day. Sufis will pray 3 times a day, and we did see that amongst the Muslims there. But they'll also pray like an optional 4th time. With this particular practice, and I'll get into this in a whole nother book by a woman named Cornelia Walker Bailey, where she actually breaks down a certain practice called seeking and whatnot, where they're taught how to pray in a certain manner 3 times a day, facing the east. But going further, I love Geechee artwork. Straight love that stuff, for real. Another practice which I thought was fantastically interesting was the concept of river baptisms. And they talk about this almost almost the most. The people that are going in there looking for stories to hear, they want to hear about conjuring a lot, and they want to hear about these river baptisms, which I thought was amazing, because this river baptism concept, it's not something that they were taught from the slave master, and that really needs to be understood. The first fruit concept wasn't taught by the slave master, and this river baptism stuff wasn't taught by the slave master. These are two separate traditions. These are traditions that are separate from the Christianity going on around them at the time. And they give a really, I'm going to have to do a long video on this one because they give a really detailed breakdown of this, which I think is fantastic. But it's definite own tradition for people who are of an African descent who either consider themselves Christians or Messianic Israelites. What's interesting about this, and when you'll see it when I do the video on this particular practice, is this book here gives you practices to go back into West Africa and see if you can find similarities to them, right? And so I'm going to describe a little bit of this ceremony here, and like I'm saying, you'll be able to see it's a full breakdown of something to where we can actually go and see if people do anything similar to in West Africa, right? I know a lot of people talk about like Hebrewisms in West Africa or Christianisms in West Africa, etc. This is one of those things we can go look for, whether you're a Christian or an Israelite. So baptism candidates are led to the river dressed in white robes, accompanied by songs of going to the river Jordan. This is done at the ebb of the tide, when the tide's going out, so that to ensure that the tide washes away the sins. A prayer is said to the river by the preacher to ensure the cleansing of the sins and whatnot. And then everybody is dunked individually. Everybody is fully submerged individually. There's another book that I'm going to be breaking down by Cornelia Walker Bailey, where she actually gets full into this and talks about like the age requirements involved. The process of being a candidate, what a candidate has to go through, all those kind of, it's a full tradition, family. It is a full tradition that people need to fully understand. And when Cornelia Walker Bailey talks about it, she's like, yeah, the way we do it, it seems like it either came from from the Muslims in West Africa or something in West Africa, because she breaks down like you get a spiritual guide in this whole thing, to where like there's somebody who leads you through this process. So you have to be a minimum of 12 years old. Think about a minimum of 12 years old. Like we're talking like bar mitzvah age type stuff, right? Minimum 12 years old. You choose someone to be your guide that teaches you how to pray, teaches you how to find your particular spot to go pray, teaches you how to do certain things, etc., whatnot, teaches your responsibilities as an adult member of the church or the assembly, etc., because you're not allowed to be a child anymore after this. This is like their Christian coming of age kind of a concept. This is like their you're no longer considered a child after this. I'll just say it like that. But yeah, there's documentation of this practice all day long in the South. All day long in the South. There's way more references in this book to funeral processions and setting ups and all that type of stuff. And I'm going to get into that on a whole nother video. But what I wanted to break down, particularly here, is that there's literally two versions of this where they do the same thing. And people need to understand this. And this is literally one of the things that the Christians saw, that they said, well, this couldn't be a Christian practice. This has to be something from Africa and whatnot, right? So first and foremost, the drums are signaled. They have drum signaling to where they can speak to all the different communities with the drums and whatnot. So when it's time for a harvest festival, when it's time to meet on, I'll even break this down. They had Saturday meetings, some of them. You know what I'm saying? I'll definitely break that down on a whole nother one, right? When it was time for a Saturday meeting, or when it was time for a harvest festival, or when somebody died, they had different ways to signal this with drums. Just like they have in the Caribbean and other places, to where they're speaking with the drums, going for distances and whatnot, right? So they signal out to somebody, and they even break down some of the signaling that they would do in order to tell you that somebody died, etc. Whatnot. It's fantastic how they break stuff down like this in the book, right? But they let you know the passing. There's a funeral procession with drums as well. Dancing is done till dawn, and there's food, right? But it's done a little bit different. It's done a little bit different for two sides. Like, so for instance, one side, at one point, they'll actually kill a white chicken, and I'll get into the white chicken concept in a different video. They'll sprinkle the blood around. Hold on real quick. Let me get some drink. Oh, hold on, family. I got someone knocking on my door. Let me play some music right quick for a quick intermission.
You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. I am Peyton Manning level. I'm on GOAT status. I think I'm the baddest mother lover ever walk on this planet. Damn it, you could never see me. You could never beat me. You could never be me. Disrespect me, and I'm eating all of your pizza. I know I'm not right. I know I'm not white. I know I'm gon' call the popo on you if you hit me. I don't fight. I'm a rapper. I don't write. Rio, you got all that hype. That's the stuff that I don't like. Why you laughing at my height? I wish I could slap your face. You just think you're so amazing. You just think that you're the greatest. Why you bucking Tom Brady? I am Peyton Manning. End of conversation. You just hating. I am Peyton Manning. Say it. I am Peyton Manning. Say it. No, Dibble God playing. That's a Drake line. Beat a midget up. That's a hate crime. 8 towns on 3 game time. Got the trunk knocking from the baseline. I'm all about the money, baby, crocker cake time. Chopsticks on deck, no Shanghai. 4-5, you come to my waistline. Keep the 4-5 tip by my waistline. You soft in the middle like fruit pie. I know it hard for you to walk a straight line. You wouldn't throw trays in the food fight. That what I heard through the grapevine. I know you don't mind wasting your time. I would just prefer you didn't waste mine. You gon' get what coming to you in due time. Little pussycat running from the K9. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning. You ain't nowhere in my category, mandatory for me to tell you that you were very boring. And the moral of the story, I wish I could just ignore you, but they gotta burn your body, put you in the crematorium. And I'm the only audio inside the auditorium. And when I'm finished with you, you will not have no memorial. You wanna be Luigi, but you're not ready for Mario. And no scenario, running circles around your cardio. And that's about it, though, it's not a secret. Everybody know that you ain't coming close. I leave you comatose, and you become a ghost. I overdose, I gotta overload. That's when the windows of heaven open up for me with the overflow. And I can feel the power moving within every last chromosome. Battle right around the corner, you already know it's on. Understand me, you're not Peyton Manning. You're not Peyton Manning. Woo!
That song was literally perfect timing because I'm just done with what I needed. Sorry about that, family. Stuff happens when you go live. You know what I'm saying? So back to where I was at. Let me pull this back up. So what I wanted to talk about here was the difference in the food, right? Or not just food, but after practices during this thing. Like, so during the funerals, so both sides do the same thing, right? So there's drums that are sent that send off the signal. There's the funeral procession, right? Different things are done once they get to the funeral site, but there's a funeral procession, and there's food and there's dancing in a ring all night. Now, what's different between the two different traditions, and what I noticed is that there would be a group of people who would kill a white chicken and sprinkle the blood around, and some would eat the chicken, etc. And then with another group of people, they would drink coffee and eat bread, and still they would all dance all night in a circle, both groups. But when the people like the Christian side or the people who weren't doing the conjuring and whatnot with it, they would finish it off by praying towards the east together in the morning time at sunrise. Now, what I thought was intriguing about this is what made the whole thing stand out to me, family, is that there was a Christian man who watched that practice happen to where they stopped at the end of the funeral and they prayed towards the east in the morning time. And he's literally denigrating the practice as some kind of African practice, and saying that they don't have any real religion anyway, like Christianity and whatnot. And what stood out to me is like, so for instance, I know Christians, like Coptic Christians and Ethiopian Christians or whatever, that stand bound prostrate when they pray. Like there's Ethiopian Christians like during Ramadan that'll go kick it with Muslims and pray with them just in solidarity. But like the Coptic Christians still stand, bow, prostrate, right? And so this concept of that form of prayer not being Christian really stood out to me, when the man thought that it was not Christian, because this is something that would be Christian throughout a large portion of the Christian world, then and prior to, etc. So not necessarily like with even in Western Christianity, you can see people who do like stand bound, who stand bound, prostrate in certain traditions. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, okay, that it really, really perked my interest, right? Because I was like, I didn't see the split before, right? I didn't really see the split before. But again, this is one of them situations where you're seeing two people or two groups doing similar practices, right? Dancing in a circle, having the procession, eating food, etc., right? Having the funeral, right? Using the drums. But it's done in different ways. So if I am someone who's not of the community, I might not be able to tell the difference, right? But if I'm of the community, I can totally tell, well, this is the group that does this is the group that does that, blah, 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are the ones that are going to pray facing the east at the end. These are the ones who are going to cut the chicken and bleed it out and eat that joint. Like, there's different ones, family. And so, again, I can't emphasize enough that there was a group of people who prayed like Daniel from the book of Daniel, facing Jerusalem, praying 3 times a day, standing, kneeling, and prostrating. Shout out to the man, dude. Yeah. Look at that. Beautiful picture of the funeral procession. Beautiful picture. Beautiful painting of it. What I thought was extremely interesting, and I really can't wait to point this one out on another video, is the concept of bad luck foods. So again, both sides had bad luck foods, but it was interesting as to what the bad luck foods were. And so, for instance, amongst the certain side, you can see to where like there's things like they wouldn't eat eels or certain kinds of fish, right? They would eat fish, but not all the kinds of fish. Which again, if you understand like the Old Testament laws in terms of fish with scales, etc., that becomes intriguing. Same thing when it comes to things like rabbits and whatnot. There was a group of people who wouldn't eat rabbits and whatnot. There was also a group of people who wouldn't eat chickens, and it was broke down like the chickens were being sacrificed again, like at the funeral, like the chickens were being sacrificed also for to relieve hexes and all those kind of things, right? So when you read New Testament practices and other Old Testament practices about not eating food sacrificed to idols and whatnot, that also makes a lot of sense. So there's a whole concept of people who have a Christian tradition, but they're doing first harvest feasts, and they're also abstaining from certain types of food. This needs to be understood as bad luck foods that just so happen to match up similarly to things in the Bible. Again, and there's this concept of prayer, and I really need to stress this. They prayed at the rising of the sun, the midday sun, and at sundown, putting their heads on the ground. Now, like I said, family, I originally thought this was an Islamic practice that was adopted, that they changed or whatnot. But you had Muslims doing their thing side by side at the same time, right? But the Muslims were using prayer rugs, and they were reciting certain things in Arabic. And even some of the recitations are marked in this book, Drums and Shadow, right? And it's a different practice than what the Christians are doing. Again, the Christians are doing this, praying at the rising of the sun, the midday sun, and at sundown, putting their heads on the ground, just like they're Daniel, and just like they're Jesus in the New Testament, for instance, right? There's a situation where he makes sujud 3 times, where he stands, bows, and prostrates 3 times, in the middle of the night at that, you know what I'm saying? But it's a similar form of prayer and whatnot, right? And we see David calling out to the Most High in morning, noon, and night, in a very similar fashion. And again, like I said, this is not an Islamic practice. This is not a Muslim practice. This was a practice that the Christians were doing. And it's spoken of on more than just these 2 pages here. But again, I marked 2 pages where they specifically just say a small thing about it, about the practice. But there's a lot more about it, family. They had things called praise houses. And you could also understand it to be a praise house, like a word for prayer, like a prayers house, like a prayers house. And these were where the people went to go. They would go pray. They would go do ring shots within the space. They would do their seeking rituals there, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of stuff that happened in the praise house. And again, in the church house, they separated once they got there, looking very much like Ethiopian Christianity. They separated the men from the women, and the children typically sat in the middle. The women would sit on one side, the men would sit on the other, and the children would sit in the middle, and they would all stand and face the east as they prayed. For those who are interested, I suggest you pause this up and check this out here. This is like the Gullah version. This is the Lord's Prayer in the Gullah dialect, which I thought was extremely interesting. Extremely interesting. This has nothing to do with the book. This is not said in the book, but I thought this was a very interesting tradition, right? A very interesting concept, because a lot of people don't recognize that we have our own native Creole dialect in America, right? With the Gullah dialect in other places, other Creole languages, etc., whatnot. And that's one of the things that really makes this book stand out. Again, is the people are speaking their own language, breaking this stuff down. They're speaking. They are 100% unabashedly speaking the Gullah dialect, unabashedly, and it makes the book so authentic. Particularly with the old people, it's beautiful when you hear them break stuff down, because they don't, like the real cast. They don't even care. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're just going in. And for the people who are interested in like African spiritual traditions and other things, I want to point this out here just as a small caveat. I'm not going to go too deep into it here, but I will make a whole separate video about this part here. Is the different African traditions, again, like on the other side of Christianity and Islam, from the African spirituality concepts and whatnot. And what's interesting about this is a lot of people are talking about like Kumbaya being a Hebrew song. I disagree with that concept personally. But what's even more interesting about that is this book points out to where you can see the potential origin in some Geechee lore and some Gullah lore about some Africans who flew away, who were chanting some certain words to fly away. So I'll definitely break that one down on a whole nother video. But there's breakdowns in the book on where the term Gullah actually comes from and what it means and how they use it. They break down how they make the drums that they use, family. Like, real talk, like multiple people break down the process on how they made the drums, what they made them out of, etc. How big they were, what they looked, all them kind of things, man. You hear reference to Anansi the spider. You hear reference to Brer Rabbit. Again, the flying Africans. You hear reference to the conjure doctors and the conjuring tradition and the different spiritual traditions. You hear the breakdown of people being born with the call, or the ability to be able to see a call over their face, the ability to see spirits and all them kind of things. And so it's a really interesting tradition when you break that stuff down. And again, like, there's a really big story that gets told quite a bit, and that you can see is a really big part of the Geechee lore, which is a story in Gullah in Gullah Geechee lore about a group of slaves that turned into birds and flew back to Africa after chanting a particular phrase. They were like, so they made a hoe stand up on, like a hoe is thought to be like a magical instrument for the fact that these slaves were able to make it stand up. Like once they got off the slave ship, they found out they weren't in Africa. They were like, oh, the heck with this. They got a hoe. They made the hoe stand straight up on edge. Apparently they can make the hoe work for them, or certain people say you can make the hoe do your work for you, right? But they started dancing in a circle and were repeating the phrase faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until some say they turned into birds and flew away, and some just say they flew away, right? But the concept is they flew away and went back to Africa. And like I said, I'm going to break down how this Kumbaya song could potentially be related to that phraseology and to that story and to that song. In which case, again, you'll see a dualistic aspect of how this stuff works. You'll see how it's done in the conjuring concept and how it's done amongst the so-called Christian people. Because there is definitely, again, like I said, there's two clear, distinct cultures that practice similar looking traditions. And there's also, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's not a blended culture. There's definitely a blended culture. But here's something that I got from watching this book, or reading this book, that stood out to me. The old people, the really, really old people from the 80s to above, right, to the hundreds, they were asked about conjuring. And to the last one, they all said the same thing. They said this conjuring stuff wasn't so big when I was a child. It became more of a thing now in recent times amongst the people and amongst the young people right now in the 1930s, etc. Right? He said back he's like when I, from the people who were in their hundreds to the people in their 80s, right? They're saying the conjuring was not a big thing for us. It was not a prevalent practice around here. And that becomes very, very, very important to understand when you know the time period that and the places that these slaves were taken from when they were taken to the American Low Country, from like the Carolinas to Georgia, etc. When you understand when and where they were taken from, that becomes a very big deal for him, because they're a heavily Islamic part of West Africa. A heavily Islamic part of West Africa. A heavy Sufi Islamic part of West Africa. And so not just the Sufi part of West Africa. These are particular Sufis who have a very Israelite type or a biblical type leaning towards their understanding of certain things, right? So for instance, and I'm going to break this down even further, I'm just going to touch on this. There is a group of Sufi clerics, for instance, that you can find amongst the Fulani, which are amongst the Geechee peoples. You can find amongst the Mandinka, who are amongst the Geechee. You can find amongst the Hausa, who are amongst the Geechee, and you can find amongst the Wolof, who are amongst the Geechee. All four of these people, all four of these groups had the same clerical group, the same Islamic cleric group that spoke the same language. Okay, this one group spoke the same language and went amongst the four different tribes, and another fifth one, but I'm not going to talk about them right now. And they have this practice of tithing that they did. So Muslims, they have this concept of charity that they practice, but they typically will they will do charity at 2.5% of what they earn in a year. This group here was doing tithing on crops, on cattle, on gold, salt, indigo, like cotton, like the things that were grown, like the actual. So like you see here where the people talking about the harvest feast, where they bring everything to the church and divide it. Again, we're seeing that concept in West Africa, even amongst the Muslims who have a tithing system that they institute, right? And again, these are huge tribes that I'm talking about. The Hausa is the biggest biggest tribe in Africa, period. They're 80 million people plus, right? Then we got the Fulani, Mandinka, Wolof. These are not small peoples and whatnot, not small groups of people. And the Mandinka and Fulani are a very sought after group of people in the Low Country, particularly. And so something that shout out to my man Yashub, aka Genesis 49ers or whatnot, something he was bringing out was the concept of people being persecuted in West Africa for having Israelite traditions and whatnot, or having Christian traditions, how Messianic traditions, however you want to look at it, right? People who weren't practicing Islam at a certain point in time, that they were getting persecuted and whatnot. And so something I was talking to him about was like, so what you would expect to find in a situation is like, so if the Christians and the Israelites are getting persecuted in West Africa, right, under the Muslims and whatnot, we should expect to see, particularly during the times of slavery, etc., we should expect to see their practices popping up here where you can't see them in Africa, because here they're not getting the same oppression. And that's what this book shows, family. This book shows the diversity of practices, and like I'm saying, what potentially could be a legit form of African Christianity coming off the slave ship, or African Messianic Christians coming off the slave ship, period. And this is the last one I'll touch on here, because this is something that I have a very personal story with my father, who broke this down to me. Like, so my father really broke down the concept of witch doctors and voodoos and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? To where like how, again, like those aren't our people. That we came from a whole different group of people and whatnot. They had a different set of practices and whatnot. And this became evident in a story that he told me about my aunt, whom became very, very ill as a child. So my father grew up, like I said, in Alabama, in northern Alabama, and everyone except one child was born in the house, like with a doctor that came to the house, etc., all those kind of things, right? He grew up on a hillside where there were multiple families living on the hillside. They all purchased. My grandfather and his brother purchased, or my great grandfather and his brother purchased the land, and then doled out like property to everyone in the family and whatnot. Multiple families living on the property. They had all kind of fruit trees. They had vineyards. They had all kind of gardens they were growing. The men would go out and fish instead of hunt. You know what I'm saying? And they man could they fish. My grandfather I have a stuffed like 15, 16 pound bass that my grandfather caught. Huge. I got pictures of my grandfather with these fish and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? As a matter of fact, in his old age, he ran a bait and tackle shop. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to you, Baba. And so a story that my father told me is, again, my aunt got sick. They went and brought the doctor to the house. The doctor said there's like, they basically said your daughter is going to die. She's basically almost terminal. And there's nothing I can do about the situation. Just make her comfortable, right? And the doctor left the house, went down the way, and what my father told me was that my great grandmother, right, whose people come from Georgia, etc., right? She said, "Not my baby," and ran up on the hillside and grabbed a whole bunch of roots and herbs and whatnot, and boiled them down into a liquid and whatnot, and told the family that she was to drink every drop of that stuff, and she was supposed to drink it at a certain point in the day, every day, and that she drink, and she wouldn't grab my hand like, no, you drink every drop, and wouldn't like emphasize it, like. And so my aunt did this for the prescribed amount of time, and she's alive and kicking today. Where she wouldn't have been had my great grandmother done nothing, right? And so what my father was describing to me was the root doctor tradition, right? The people who knew about roots and healing and whatnot. Like, so you do find people who do the conjuring and the root doctor stuff, right? But there's also this separate, and this needs to be emphasized, because this is what I got from the book. The book was kind of breaking down like how everything was blending together at the time and whatnot, right? But beforehand, they were separated. You know what I'm saying? And this needs to be understood. So you can go to it, like you go to a root doctor when you want to get healing. You go to a conjure doctor when you want to put a hex or a fix on somebody, right? And they would do similar things like make potions or drinks or all the kind of things. They use similar methods to do such, right? But they're making them out of different things, right? Like, so a conjure doctor needs your hair, he needs your toenail, he needs your skin, he needs something of you or not. A root doctor is just going to like, it's like an apothecary from the Old Testament and whatnot, right? They're giving you stuff just to cure what ails you and whatnot, right? So you got the Christians going to root doctors and whatnot, and then you got the people who believe in the conjuring going to conjure doctors and whatnot. And this tradition, I saw the difference in this tradition in my own family, where my father's swearing up and I was like, we don't like if you said anything about voodoo to my father, he got this look of disgust on his utter disgust, like it was the downfall of the African people. like straight up and down. And he was like, he's like, all the stuff that I've seen in Alabama and Louisiana, Mississippi, he was like, nah, fam. He's like, this right here is not doing nothing for our people, right? Now that was his position, right? He was very, very strong about that, right? Very strong about that. And when I heard this story about the roots coming off the hillside with my great grandmother, I was like, is that connected to the voodoo? He was like, no, not at all. I was like, wow. Okay. So this book helped me corroborate a story that my father told me about the separateness and the traditions. And again, I'm not saying certain people don't blend them. I'm not saying they don't. What I'm saying is it needs to be understood is that there was a time to when they weren't blended. There's a time to when they weren't blended like people think they were, or they think they are. And so it needs to be understood. And these traditions need to be understood separately and also need to be understood blended together. And separately, what I'm saying is we're looking at an African tradition of messianic practices, of Old Testament practices and New Testament practices, whether you want to link it to Christianity, being an Israelite, whatever you want to link it to, right? We're talking about Old Testament and New Testament practices coming off the slave ship that are separate, again, 100% separate from the Christianity being taught by the slave master. 100% separate from that. So let me go back to this joint right quick, because I want y'all to see the book one more time. Again, this is a fantastic book, and it can't be emphasized enough. This book should be mandatory reading in all public schools during Black History Month. Because it doesn't matter what aspect of Africa you come from and what tradition you practice from Africa, right? It touches on that. It gives you something to hold on to and touch on and understand. Like, oh, okay, there again, the biggest question we have to answer for ourselves is, what were we doing before we got on the slave ship? And books like this give you stuff to point back to. Books like Lorenzo Dow Turner's Africanisms in the Gullah dialect give you 21 different languages and people to go back and check these traditions among. So 21 different people we can go back and check, like, okay, were they doing things like the river baptisms? Were they doing things like the first harvest feasts? Were they doing things like the bad luck foods, etc.? We have traditions to go back and go check out, family. And people to go check them out amongst. So there's a lot of people. I'm noticing a lot of people in the UA community, etc. They're trying to figure out how to make Christianity African, right? And you don't got to put a square peg into a round hole. One, there is Afro-Asiatic Christianity historically. It just is what it is, right? You can't get around that. A lot of people like to start at the church fathers, but that's not where the history of Christianity starts in any way, shape, or form. But on top of that, we're seeing a legitimate New Testament practice that also adheres to Old Testament practices coming off the slave ships, or potentially coming off the slave ships, right? Potentially coming off the slave ships and not being recognized as the same Christianity as the slave master. Not being recognized as the same Christianity. So, family, I want to just say, if you can, pick this book up for yourself. Pick it up for your children. Pick it up for your parents, fam. Because it'll help them understand their history. It'll help them understand the history. With that, family, I'm going to check, see if I got any questions in the chat. No questions. Shout out to all the fam in the chat, you know what I'm saying? But with that, family, I'm going to shut this one down, and I will be getting into individual practices. Like I will be getting into the depths and breadths of what they're talking about, these practices, going further this weekend and next weekend. But with that, family, I say peace and love.
I like the way this feel. Yeah. Let my soul cry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Minister, we gonna speak from the heart on this one. I'm performing lyrical funerals, no obituary. I killed your boy and brought him back to life. Pet cemetery. My anointing not based on attendance at a seminary. Scarlet witches, they attracted to the visionary. Everywhere I go, I bring the word with me, missionary. Soldiers drafted in the war machine, military. Pay attention, what I'm saying to you, legendary. You got the demeanor of a front desk secretary. That mean you take the calls, but you don't make the calls. That's why you hate, cause ain't nothing fake about me at all. Now I dare you try to say that with a straight face. My delivery in tip-top, great shape. I'm too advanced for you, light years, space age. No evolution for you cavemen, stone age. I'm a thoroughbred, rock solid. I came from the bottom to the top, rock climbing. I grew up in the hood, pros and cons. That's that full court pressure when the ambulance roll out the stretch. Why can't you see it's not logical? If you live diabolical. Boy, your point of view smaller than the hair follicle molecule. This for all of them that follow you, smoking all of them barbecue. When I pull up, your voice don't correct itself with no auto-tune. I got a whole nother level that I can enter whenever I gotta deal with the devil. I pick a whole nother method. I hear a whole lot of yapping. They wanna see my reaction. Really out here in the community making it happen. I don't really think they understand the dilemma. They ain't looking at the man in the mirror. I can't say it any clearer. The plan is very simple. It's time to start playing in the temple. Before somebody come and put the can on your temple. Reaching like a baby with his hand for the nipple. The Grand Reaper coming with his hand on the sickle. In the van coming with a ram with it. When the van come and get him. I am so glad that I changed up. Made it out of where I came from. Watch for the slide and the hook of the slow ball, fastball, and their change up. That ghetto lifestyle, it changed us. Go back to visit, it ain't changed much. Only difference is now the way that my brain process information. And Satan, but after my license, day one, let me say something. Only reason that I'm still alive today because God's grace is amazing. Just another raisin in the sun. Dream deferred when things occur. Now you getting served right on the curb like a lemonade stand. I just gave you the benediction, let the whole church say amen.